Bonjour. So today we're talking about the Model Context Protocol, or in short, MCP, developed by Anthropic, and it lets your AI not just talk, but actually do things, like fetch data, send emails, manage your calendar, and much more. Now, by the end of this video, you know exactly what MCP is, you know how to create your own MCP server, and how to connect it to an MCP client. So let's not waste any more time, let's get started. So what is MCP really? Well, to answer this question, let's first take a step back. Traditionally, if you wanted your LLM to send an email, it couldn't just do that, right? I mean, for example, we can ask Claude, please send me an email introducing yourself. And then it reacts with, I appreciate you wanting to connect, but I should clarify that I can't actually send emails. So basically, Claude can write the email, but it doesn't have the ability to actually send it. I mean, it cannot interact with your laptop, your email account, or any other service. So if we want this type of behavior, then we need to write a custom connection for it. Simple, right? Because we as programmers know how to do this stuff. I mean, you will dive into the official Gmail API documentation, you figure out exactly which endpoint to call, which request to send, the authentication, the error handling, all that good stuff. Now, this all looks good, but if Gmail changes their API, then your code can break. So maintaining that code can become a nightmare, especially if you want to connect your LLM to more services. And besides this, you are probably not the only one creating this email sending functionality. In other words, everyone is reinventing the wheel. The solution? MCP, a standardized way to connect AI models to different data sources and tools. And it's nothing more than that. MCP just standardizes how LLMs talk to other tools or services. And it's not a revolutionary concept. I mean, in software development, we also have something similar like REST APIs, which is more or less a standardized way how computer systems talk to each other over the internet. Anyways, let's dive a bit deeper. The architecture of MCP looks like this. You have an MCP host with client, which is something like Claude, ChatGPT, or another tool acting as an agent. And then on the other side, you have the MCP server, which are basically the web APIs or local functions to other tools, apps, or local data. And then in between that, you have the protocol, and that is the two-way connection between the client and the server. Now, if this still sounds a bit fake, then hang on, because we are going to create a simple MCP server to make this all crystal clear. And please be aware, the goal is to explain what MCP is and how it works. We don't go into all the nitty-gritty details about how to create this MCP server and all the things that are possible. Anyways, that being said, for this simple example, we need a few things to install. First, we need Claude Desktop, and yeah, you can simply download that by typing into Google Claude Desktop, and yeah, you will probably figure out how to download it. Then we need to have Node installed, and you can check if you have installed Node by typing node-v, and then you press enter. And if you see something like this, then you have Node installed. And we also need npm. Now you can check if you have npm installed by typing npm-v. Sorry, I made a typo here. npm-v. And yeah, we also have that installed. Now, if you haven't installed this, then simply Google it and you can install it. It's quite straightforward. Now let's clear this. Now let's create a new folder. And we can do that by using this command. And then we give the folder the name weather-mcp. And then we press enter. Then we go with cd inside that folder. We press enter again. Let's clear the screen. Now let's initialize a new npm project via the npm init-y command. Then we press enter. Let's clear it again. If we press ls, we see that a package.json is created. Now let's open that package.json file, and I do that in Visual Studio Code. If you haven't installed that yet, you also need to install it. And I open it with this command. All right, now let's open the package.json and let's make this a bit larger. Let's close this. Don't show again. All right, so this is our package.json file. More about this later. But now we need to install some dependencies. So let's open the terminal again. Let's clear this. And then we're going to install this dependency via this command. So let's press enter. Now, this is basically the main toolbox for building an MCP server. And then secondly, we need to install TypeScript because we are going to create the MCP server in TypeScript. So we use this command and we press enter again. Now let's clear the screen. And then here inside our package.json file, we see that these dependencies are installed. Now back to the terminal again. And then inside this path that we see here, we create a new folder called source or src. And then we press enter. And then inside that source folder, let's go in it with cd, press enter. Then in here we create, via the touch command, we create an index.typescript file and we press enter. All right, and we see that file here, but there's still one important thing, and that is that inside this here we need to write type, colon, and then module, and then a comma. And that is because the Model Context Protocol SDK uses modern JavaScript modules. So yeah, basically we need to enable that. All right, now let's create a simple MCP server to make clear what MCP is all about. So let's go to the index.ts file. And then, we need to import 3 things, which I already copied for you because I don't want to waste your time. And I paste this in here. Now let's close this. Yeah, we need an MCP server, a standard in-out server transport, and we use this validation library. Now, this will make sense in a bit. And then the first step is to create a simple MCP server. So we already imported this here. So we can simply do this, and yeah, this basically initializes our server. We give it the name weather server and we give it a version. And then we are going to register a tool. So we can simply do server.register, register tool, and then we do this. And then we give it a name. We give it the name get weather, then a comma, then curly braces. And then in here we specify some metadata. So we give it a title. We say get weather, and then we give it a description. And the description will be get the current weather for a given location, comma, and then we specify an input schema. So basically that's what we have here. And yeah, here we more or less say this tool requires an input parameter, an input parameter of type string, and here's a description of that input parameter. And then we do a comma, and then here we specify the function, so the thing that needs to be executed. And that is this. So it takes a city as an argument, and then it simply returns this content. And yeah, I know what we now have is that for every city we pass in here, we give the exact same message. So for every city we say the current weather in city is sunny, honey. But this is just for demo purposes. So yeah, for this is fine. But in here, you can create all kinds of services. You can call other APIs, or I don't know, whatever you want to do, you can do it in here. But we are not yet finished. We need to do a bit more. So yeah, we basically need to set up how our server will communicate with the AI client. So yeah, more or less a transport protocol. So we say const transport equals, and then this will be a new standard in-out server transport, like this. Now this allows the server to communicate through standard input-output, which is perfect for local development. And then we need to connect our server to this transport, and we simply do that by server, and then we say connect, and then we give it the transport like this. Now, of course, we now you do it all locally, but you can also use a remote transport, and then you can connect to remote APIs or remote services. All right, so now we have this simple MCP server. This looks really simple, right? So let's connect it to an MCP client. And we can create an MCP client from scratch, but in this example, we will use Claude Desktop, because otherwise the video might take way too long. So in order to register our MCP server in Claude Desktop, we open Claude Desktop, and then we go to Settings, here, and then we go to Developer, and then we say here Edit Config, and then we need to open this. Now we open it with Sublime Text. Now let's zoom in a bit. We'll make this larger. And then in here, you know, inside these two curly braces, we are going to specify our MCP servers. And in this case, we only have one MCP server. So we press enter, and then I already copied it for you. So I will paste it in like this. Let's zoom out a bit. Now let's explain this. So this here, the MCP servers, this is basically the main section. And yeah, in here, you can specify a list of all custom tools that you want Claude to know about. Now, we specified one tool, and we give that tool the name My Weather Server. Then we specify a type, which stands for standard in-out. And this basically tells Claude that the server is a local program, and that Claude should communicate with it through standard input-output. Because remember, you know, we created a very simple local MCP server. But of course, this can also be a remote MCP server. And then we have this command npx, and this tells Claude to use npx to run our server. And Rs that we see here are the arguments or extra instructions given to npx. So in this case, we specify -y or -y, which means to automatically say yes if npx needs to download a package. And this tsx is a tool that runs TypeScript files. And yeah, here, this is the path, you know, this is the path to our MCP server. So basically, let's write it here. So basically, this command is used to start the MCP server. So npx here, then -y, then tsx, and then this path here, like this. Okay. So let's save this and close it. So yeah, the file that we just created tells Claude how to connect to our local MCP server. Now this is all also nicely described in the official docs if you want to know more about this. Anyways, let's now restart Claude. So the config file gets reloaded. And now let's open it. Let's start Claude again, I mean. And let's now ask Claude, what is the weather in Amsterdam? Then we see that it wants to use this tool because it finds our MCP server. And now we say allow once. And then it says the current weather in Amsterdam is sunny. It sounds like a lovely day there. And that is basically what we have programmed here. Now, you know, we can give it any city we want. We can also say, what is the weather in, I don't know, Utrecht or Utrecht in Dutch. We press enter. We click on this here. And then we say again, allow once. And then it says, the current weather in Utrecht is also sunny. Looks like it's a beautiful day across the Netherlands. Now you may wonder, how does Claude Desktop knows that when we type in this question, like how is the weather in Amsterdam, how does it knows that it should use this specific MCP server with this tool that we have registered? How does it know that? Well, good question. So let's break that down and hopefully things will now click for you. Because this is basically what the Model Context Protocol is all about. So, quick recap. First, we told our MCP client, aka the Claude app, where to find and how to connect to our server by using the config file. Now, what happens is that when the Claude app starts, it reads this config file, it connects to our server, and behind the scenes, it requests or asks our server for a list of all available tools. Now, we didn't program the MCP client from scratch, but if we did, we had to program this functionality, of course. But that being said, our server is a very polite and nice guy. So when Claude asks for a list of tools, the server sends a list of all the tools it has to offer. In this case, it's just one tool, but you get the idea. The interesting part is that each tool comes with a specific blueprint or metadata that the AI understands. For example, in our specific case, this is what the server sends back to the client. Now in here we see the name, we see the title, we see a description, we see an input schema, which are basically the input parameters that we specified. And remember, all this metadata that we see here is what we also have programmed here. Now the important part is that this blueprint tells the AI exactly what the tool does and what it needs. That's why specifying this metadata is really important. So when we asked what's the weather in Amsterdam, the Claude app, aka the MCP client, sends your question along with the list of tools, including their metadata, to the LLM. Now again, we did not program the MCP client or Claude desktop from scratch, but if we did, then we would have programmed this logic. Anyways, Claude sends the question, including the list of tools, to the LLM. Now, as we know, the LLM is pretty smart at interpreting text. So it reads your question and understands your intent. It scans the list of all available tools and sees that the Get Weather tool is a perfect match for your request. So it sends a message to the client like, yo bro, use the Get Weather tool, and this tool uses a parameter named city, and you can use the value Amsterdam for that parameter. Now the MCP client then executes the Get Weather call to the MCP server and receives a response from the MCP server. The client then sends this response back to the LLM. The LLM takes the response and formulates it into a nice answer for us. And then finally the client shows the answer, just like we see here in the Claude desktop app. Now, in a nutshell, this whole process, so from the initial connection to executing a call to the MCP server and displaying the message to us, is what the Model Context Protocol is. It is just a standardized way how LLMs can talk to other tools or services. Now, also important to mention is that this entire process is made much easier because we use this Model Context Protocol SDK library when building our server. And this library basically ensures that our MCP server speaks the exact same language as the MCP client. And many of the nitty-gritty details are handled by you behind the scenes by this Model Context Protocol SDK. And these are things like managing the initial connection and the communication between the client and the server. Now, because of this, we can just program our MCP server as simple as this. You know, it's not that much code. I mean, all the nitty-gritty details are basically handled by this Model Context Protocol SDK. So I really hope that this gave you a good understanding about what MCP is. And if you enjoyed the video, then please like the video and give it a comment, you know, that boosts the algorithms and it motivates me to create more videos like this. And just a shameless promotion, I also have a second channel, which is called DevAmps02. And on there I create self-improvement videos in a cinematic style because I also enjoy filmmaking. And I want to become better at it, of course. And the way to do that is by creating videos and pushing them into the audience. Anyways, check out the second channel and I see you in the next one. Cheers!